The Harkos warrior loomed over the trembling human, its reptilian eyes narrowing as it studied the creature's fragile form. The human, sprawled on the cargo bay floor, stared back with wild, defiant eyes. Its skin was bare, its body small and seemingly weak compared to the Harkos' armored scales and towering stature. Yet, there was something in its gaze, a spark of resistance that made the warrior's tail flick with unease. "Does it understand us?" the warrior growled, its voice a deep, guttural rumble. The human flinched but didn't look away. "It does," replied the Harkos scholar, its flowing blue robes shimmering like liquid under the harsh light of the cargo bay. "We implanted a translation chip during transit. This one is of their warrior caste. Though small and seemingly frail, it has trained its body to overcome others of its kind. Its systems are disproportionately dedicated to fine motor control, and it has intentionally increased its muscle mass through simulated labor. A curious adaptation." The warrior snorted, a sound like steam escaping a vent. "Simulated labor? It has no scales, no claws, no natural weapons. What can it possibly do against us?" The scholar tilted its head, its forked tongue flicking out as if tasting the air. "Do not underestimate it. Knowledge is our greatest weapon, and this human may yet teach us something valuable. Observe." The human Luke lay still, his mind racing. He could understand their words, but the chip in his skull made their voices echo unnaturally, as if they were speaking directly into his brain. He clenched his fists, feeling the cold metal floor beneath him. He had been captured during a routine patrol, dragged onto the ship, and now he was surrounded by creatures that looked like they had stepped out of a nightmare. He didn't know what they wanted, but he wasn't going to make it easy for them. Hours later, Luke awoke in a sterile, white cell. The walls were seamless, the cot hard and unyielding. A Harkos in a yellow jumpsuit stood at the door, prodding him with a long, flexible reed. Luke slapped it away, his irritation overriding his fear. "Why am I here?" he demanded, his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. "I'm not special. I'm just a soldier," the Harkos hissed, its wide mouth stretching into something resembling a smile. "Precisely. You are ordinary, and that is why you are here. We wish to see what your kind is made of. You will fight." Luke's mind raced. Fight? Against them? He had trained in MMA, fought in amateur circuits, but these creatures were something else entirely. Their tails alone looked like they could break bones. Still, he forced a smirk. "All right, but if I'm going to fight, I want to know how you fight. If I'm going to die, I might as well give you a show." The Harkos tilted its head, its reptilian eyes narrowing. "We use our tails to cripple our opponents. Then we strike with our teeth and claws. Your kind is soft, fragile. You will not last long." Luke's smirk faded, but he nodded. "Got it. Let's see how fragile I really am." The arena was unlike anything Luke had ever seen. It was vast, with high ceilings and walls lined with strange, glowing symbols. Dozens of Harkos surrounded him, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. They laughed and jeered, their voices a cacophony of hisses and guttural growls. Luke stood in the center, his bare feet cold against the smooth floor. He was shirtless, his muscles tense, his breathing steady. The Harkos warrior stepped forward, its yellow robe discarded to reveal a white rash guard adorned with black symbols. It was massive, easily 7 feet tall, with a tail that whipped back and forth like a living weapon. The crowd cheered as it approached, its movements deliberate, predatory. "This one is strong for its species," the warrior announced, its voice booming through the arena. "But it is weak compared to us. Watch as I demonstrate our superiority." Luke raised his hands, his stance low and ready. The Harkos lunged, its tail snapping toward him like a whip. Luke blocked it with his shin, the impact sending a jolt of pain up his leg. But the tail was softer than he expected, more like a padded club than a bone-crushing weapon. He gritted his teeth and held his ground. The Harkos spun again, its tail lashing out in a wide arc. This time, Luke stepped in close, catching the tail with both hands. The scales were rough but provided enough grip. With a grunt, he yanked the creature off balance. using its momentum to lift it off the ground. The crowd gasped as Luke slammed the Harkos onto the floor, his shoulder driving into its chest. The Harkos roared, its claws slashing at Luke's sides. Blood poured from the wounds, but Luke didn't let go. He wrapped his arms around the creature's neck, squeezing with all his strength. The Harkos thrashed, its tail pounding against Luke's back, but the blows grew weaker as its air supply was cut off. Finally, with a choked hiss, the Harkos went limp. The arena fell silent. Luke stood, blood dripping from his wounds, his chest heaving. He looked around at the stunned faces of the Harkos, their laughter replaced by shock. "Not so fragile," he spat, his voice raw but defiant. "Am I?" Before anyone could react, a sharp pain shot through Luke's side. He looked down to see a Harkos guard pressing the barrel of a glassy rifle into his ribs. "Enough," the guard hissed. "You will come with us." Luke's vision blurred as the blood loss took its toll. He staggered, then collapsed to his knees. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was the Harkos scholar, its blue robes shimmering as it stepped forward, its eyes gleaming with something that might have been respect. Luke awoke to the sterile hum of machinery. His body ached. His side throbbed where the Harkos claws had torn into him, and his head felt heavy, as if filled with lead. He was no longer in the arena but in a dimly lit medical bay. The walls were lined with strange, pulsating devices, and the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and something metallic. He tried to sit up, but restraints held him firmly in place. "Do not struggle, human," a voice said, its tone calm but authoritative. Luke turned his head to see the Harkos scholar standing nearby, its blue robes now stained with streaks of dark liquid, likely his blood. "You performed admirably in the arena, better than we anticipated, but your defiance has consequences." Luke glared at the scholar, his voice hoarse but defiant. "What do you want from me? I'm not some lab rat." The scholar's forked tongue flicked out, tasting the air as if considering its words carefully. "You are more than a lab rat, human. You are a puzzle. Your species is weak, fragile, and yet you dominate your world. You lack natural weapons, yet you create tools of destruction. You are small, yet you fight with a ferocity that rivals our own. We wish to understand why." Luke's mind raced. They weren't just testing him. They were studying him, studying humanity. He clenched his fists, the restraints digging into his wrists. "If you think I'm going to help you figure out how to conquer Earth, you're dead wrong." The scholar's eyes narrowed, its voice dropping to a low, dangerous hiss. "You misunderstand, human. We do not seek to conquer. We seek to survive. Our species is dying. Our world is barren, our resources depleted. We have searched the stars for answers, and now we have found you. Your resilience, your adaptability, it is unlike anything we have encountered. If we can understand it, perhaps we can save ourselves." Luke stared at the scholar, his anger momentarily replaced by confusion. "So what? You're going to dissect me? Experiment on me until you figure it out." The scholar stepped closer, its reptilian eyes locking onto his. "No, you will fight. You will show us the limits of your kind. And in doing so, you will teach us how to overcome our own weaknesses." Before Luke could respond, the scholar turned and left the room. The restraints on the table released with a soft hiss, and Luke sat up slowly, wincing at the pain in his side. His wounds had been treated, but the bandages were crude, the work of a species that clearly didn't understand human anatomy. He swung his legs over the side of the table, his mind racing. He had to find a way out. But how? The next few days passed in a blur. Luke was taken to the arena again and again, forced to fight Harkos warriors of increasing size and skill. Each battle was more brutal than the last, but Luke adapted. He learned their weaknesses, their reliance on their tails, their slow recovery time, their lack of stamina. He used their arrogance against them, luring them into traps and exploiting their overconfidence. He won some fights and lost others, but he never gave up. The Harkos watched intently, recording every move, every strategy. The scholar was always there, observing, analyzing. Luke could feel its eyes on him, studying him like a specimen under a microscope. It infuriated him, but he used that anger. He channeled it into every punch, every kick, every desperate struggle for survival. One night, after a particularly grueling fight, Luke was returned to his cell. He collapsed onto the cot, his body bruised and battered, his mind exhausted. But as he lay there, he noticed something strange. The wall near the cot had a faint crack, almost imperceptible. He ran his fingers over it, feeling the slight indentation. It wasn't much, but it was something. Over the next few days, Luke worked in secret, using the edge of his aluminum blanket to widen the crack. It was slow, painstaking work, but he had nothing but time. Finally, one night the crack gave way, revealing a small, hidden compartment. Inside was a device, a small, cylindrical object with a single button. Luke's heart raced as he examined it. It looked like some kind of tool, but he had no idea what it did. He pressed the button, and the device hummed to life, emitting a low, pulsing light. Suddenly, the door to his cell slid open. Luke froze, his mind racing. Was this a trap, or had he just found his way out? Luke stepped into the hallway, the device clutched tightly in his hand. The corridors were eerily quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the ship's engines. He moved quickly but cautiously, his senses on high alert. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he couldn't stay. As he turned a corner, he nearly collided with a Harkos guard. The creature's eyes widened in surprise, but before it could react, Luke slammed the device into its chest. The guard convulsed, its body going rigid as the device emitted a burst of energy. Collapsed to the floor, unconscious. Luke stared at the device, a grim smile spreading across his face. It was a weapon, a stunner of some kind. He didn't know how it worked, but he wasn't about to question his luck. He moved through the ship like a shadow, using the device to disable any guards he encountered. He didn't know where he was going, but he followed the signs, symbols that looked like arrows, leading him deeper into the ship. Finally, he reached a large circular chamber. In the center was a console, its surface covered in glowing buttons and screens. Luke approached cautiously, his heart pounding. He didn't know how to operate the console, but he had to try. He pressed a button, and the screens flickered to life, displaying a map of the ship. His eyes widened as he realized what he was looking at. This was the control room. Suddenly, the door behind him slid open. Luke spun around, the device raised, but it wasn't a guard. It was the scholar. "Impressive human," the scholar said, its voice calm but tinged with something resembling admiration. "You have proven more resourceful than we anticipated." Luke glared at the scholar, his grip tightening on the device. "I'm not your experiment. I'm getting out of here." The scholar tilted its head, its forked tongue flicking out. "And where will you go? This ship is vast, and you are alone. Even if you escape, you will not survive in the void of space." Luke hesitated, the scholar's words hitting home. He didn't have a plan. He didn't even know where he was. But he couldn't give up. "Not now. Maybe," he said, his voice steady. "But I'd rather die trying than live as your lab rat." The scholar studied him for a long moment, its reptilian eyes unreadable. Then, to Luke's surprise, it stepped aside. "Very well, human. You have earned your freedom. But know this, you have given us much to consider. Your resilience, your determination. It is a lesson we will not soon forget." Luke stared at the scholar, unsure if it was a trick. But the creature made no move to stop him as he stepped toward the console. He pressed a button, and a holographic image of the ship's escape pods appeared. He selected one, and the console beeped in confirmation. As he turned to leave, the scholar spoke again. "Farewell, human. May your journey be as enlightening as ours." Luke didn't respond. He ran down the corridor, following the signs to the escape pod bay. When he reached it, he found a single pod waiting, its door open. He climbed inside, his hands trembling as he activated the controls. The pod ejected with a jolt, and Luke was thrown back in his seat as it hurtled away from the ship. Through the small window, he watched as the massive Harkos vessel grew smaller and smaller, until it was just a speck in the vastness of space. Luke leaned back, his body aching, his mind racing. He didn't know where he was or how he would get home. But for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt a glimmer of hope. He had survived. And that was enough. The escape pod drifted through the void, its systems humming softly. Luke closed his eyes, allowing himself a moment of rest. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew one thing for certain. He was done being a pawn in someone else's game. Whatever came next, he would face it on his own terms. And as the pod drifted further into the unknown, a single thought echoed in his mind. I'm coming home.